My boyfriend's mom tried to take my late mom's place. I said no. I always thought I understood what it meant to lose a loved one until I lost my mother. She was my foundation, my support, and even now, almost 3 years after her passing, her voice timbre, her laughter, and her eccentric manners still vividly echo in my thoughts. My childhood was spent in a typical but warm atmosphere. My mother cooked meals where the whole family gathered, chatting about the most absurd details of everyday life, and her advice, even if it sounded sharp, always guided me to the right choices. When I met Mike, my boyfriend, I was on guard because the loss of my mother had left a gaping hole in my soul, and I was afraid to let anyone get too close. But Mike turned out to be special. He showed patience, sensitivity, and most importantly, he understood that my mother wasn't just a person to me, she was part of my essence. His support helped me move forward without dissolving in grief and nostalgia. We had been together for about a year and a half when I first met his mother, Patricia. The meeting followed the usual pattern: a modest dinner, smiles, conversations about careers and hobbies. However, from the very beginning, I sensed something unusual. Patricia was overly attentive, excessively affectionate. Her gaze lingered on me too long as she talked about my habits and appearance, and that smile, which initially seemed welcoming, over time took on a shade of dominance. At first, it was small things. She brought me gifts from the heart, insisted that I must do this for yourself, just like your mother would, commented on episodes from my childhood that I hadn't shared with anyone, and I felt discomfort but tried to chalk it up to standard maternal tenderness toward her son's girlfriend. But over time, her intrusion became more overt. On the surface, it looked like friendly support. She brought me food when I was unwell, called to check if I'd slept well, gave advice on cleaning and organizing my schedule. However, behind it lay something deeper that made me feel like she was trying to take my mother's place not just in my reality, but in my memories as well. One evening, when Mike was away for work, Patricia showed up uninvited. I remember opening the door and seeing her with homemade pastries. She was beaming with a smile, but there was something suspicious in it. "Hello, dear, I thought you'd be tired after your shift," she said, stepping inside as if it were her territory. Thank you, Patricia, but I was just planning to." I started, but she interrupted me. "Oh, don't worry, I've got everything sorted and I wanted to chat a bit. You loved it when your mother did this for you, right?" Her tone was gentle, almost whispering, but each word echoed like a reproach. I felt something tighten inside me. I knew I couldn't tell her directly that it was inappropriate because Mike always defended his mother, and I didn't want to blow things out of proportion. But in that moment, I realized this was just the beginning. In the following weeks, her intrusiveness grew. She started hinting how your mother would have done it differently, comparing my habits and choices to how my deceased mother would have acted. Sometimes she barged in without knocking, left her items in our apartment as if checking if I'm comfortable here by her standards. At first, I tried to be patient. I convinced myself, maybe she's just showing care. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just care. It was an assault on the space that was sacred to me, an effort to rewrite my history and replace the person I loved and who would never return. Mike noticed something was off but didn't fully grasp the extent. He would say, "Mom just wants to be part of your life, don't take it personally." I nodded, but inside, anxiety was building. Each of her intrusions left a void, as if she was trying to erase my mother's imprints and fill them with her version of affection. The first signs that I was at my limit appeared when Patricia started organizing holidays without my involvement, pretending she knew how your mother would have wanted it. She rearranged photos that were dear to me, touched my personal items, gave instructions on every choice I made, from clothing style to how I interacted with colleagues. I tried to discuss with Mike that it was overwhelming me, that I felt uncomfortable, but he, as always, defended her, calling me too sensitive. Those words wounded my soul, not just because of his lack of understanding, but because I felt utterly alone. The person I loved had sided with the woman who was trying to erase memories of my mother. Gradually, I started noticing how this situation was affecting my well-being. I slept restlessly, often waking up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching my every move. I increasingly found myself checking if she had left her marks in my home, disturbed my things, or changed something meaningful to me. I realized it was going too far. This wasn't ordinary mother-in-law care, it was replacement, domination, an invasion of my reality and reshaping it to her mold. And that's when I seriously thought for the first time, can I endure this without breaking? Will I preserve my relationship with Mike if he doesn't see that his mother is going too far? That idea became my first real step toward resolution. I needed to set boundaries, or I'd lose myself. And I knew it would be difficult, scary, and likely provoke a confrontation I'd long avoided. With each month, I felt my life shrinking into a narrow, suffocating case under Patricia's supervision. She no longer held back. If her visits used to seem spontaneous, now they became regular, almost weekly. She showed up without notice, took keys to the apartment just in case you're busy, brought food to make your life easier, and started criticizing my lifestyle as if I were a teenager, not a mature woman who had lost her mother. One evening, when Mike was late at work, Patricia showed up again. This time she came with old photos, my childhood pictures with my mother, and started showing how, in her opinion, I should preserve memories, as if my mother should now be her role. "Look, dear," she said, leaning over the table. "Your mother always did it this way. You must do it right." I froze, the words right and must pierced my heart like a dagger. This wasn't affection. This was control, an effort to dictate every step and impose her interpretation of how I should live. "Patricia, these are my keepsakes," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I'll decide how to store them myself." She smiled as if it were a game. "Of course, dear, I just wanted to help." But her help became more blatant. She started pressuring Mike, saying I was too melancholic, that I constantly mourned my mother, and that he needed to take better care of me so I don't feel isolated. Mike didn't realize that behind his back, a different reality was forming where I was supposed to lose my individuality. One morning, I woke up and found a note on my table with instructions on how to keep the home in perfect condition, like your mother. I snapped. I got up, called Mike, and said I wanted to talk about Patricia. "Mike," I began, "she's crossing the line. I feel like I'm losing my essence." He sighed, irritably adjusting his collar. "You're taking it too personally. Mom's just showing care." "No, Mike, this isn't care anymore. She's trying to replace my mother. She wants to be the center of my life. I can't take it." He fell silent, and in that moment, I realized we were seeing the same issue from different angles. For me, it was mental dictatorship. For him, an expression of maternal attachment. Events spiraled from there. Patricia started visiting on weekends that used to be ours, organizing gatherings with friends of the family, inviting people I didn't know and sharing details of my life with them, as if trying to convince everyone that she now knew me better than I knew myself. My attempts to talk to her one-on-one ended in failure. She always smiled and said, "I just want to help, dear. You're too impulsive." I felt anger building, but I also realized that a direct confrontation with Patricia could destroy my relationship with Mike. But the inner rebellion was stronger. I couldn't let anyone erase memories of my mother and impose their worldview on me. One day, I returned to the apartment and saw that Patricia had rearranged the photos. She had placed her souvenirs on my shelves, moved my books, and even reorganized the kitchen. My reaction was immediate. I grabbed my phone and called Mike. "Mike, she showed up again and changed everything," I said, barely holding back tears. He tried to calm me. "Dear, don't exaggerate, she's just trying to help." "No, Mike, this isn't help, she wants to be my mother." I felt my heart pounding in my throat. "I can't live like this." And that's when a real argument erupted in our apartment. Words flew like blows. "She's violating my boundaries. You're too sensitive. She's trying to replace me. I just want you to be at peace with yourself." After that conversation, I realized I couldn't endure it any longer. I started thinking about how to defend my boundaries. I looked for ways to show Patricia that her behavior was unacceptable without damaging my relationship with Mike. It seemed almost impossible because he still believed his mother had good intentions. I began documenting all her intrusions, keeping photos, notes, recording every encroachment on my privacy. My inner tension grew, and I knew I'd soon have to take drastic steps. At the same time, I watched as Patricia penetrated deeper into our relationship. She discussed our plans with Mike, suggested changing habits I considered part of my identity, interfered in our conversations about the future, sometimes even manipulating Mike through guilt. If your mother were alive, she would want me to take care of her. I felt backed into a corner, but I knew, if I gave in, I'd lose not only memories of my mother but myself. The resolution didn't come easily, but it was clear. It was time to act. This time, I chose a decisive approach. I understood that no talks with Patricia would have an effect. Her care had long turned into obsession. It was an assault on control over my life, imposing her presence everywhere possible and essentially erasing memories of my mother. I started with a conversation with Mike. This time, I prepared. I showed him records of all her encroachments, photos, examples of her control, and her messages leading to manipulations. Mike, I said quietly but confidently, this isn't care anymore. It's encroachment. She's trying to replace my mother and dictate every step. If we don't set boundaries, I'll lose my essence. He looked at me first in shock, then started listening. I told him how each of her actions caused me pain, how she turned our relationship into a courtroom where I was always the guilty party. You know, she's a mother, he muttered, but I didn't realize it was this serious. She's not just a mother anymore, Mike. Tears welled up in my eyes through anger and pain. She's trying to take my mother's place. I can't live under her dictatorship. After that conversation, Mike finally grasped the full extent of the problem. He agreed that boundaries were needed. Together, we outlined specific measures: reduce Patricia's visits, prohibit intrusions into our home and private matters, clearly state that her advice and attempts to dictate our relationship were unacceptable. The following days turned into a real test. Patricia still visited, but now we were prepared for her tricks. When she tried to rearrange photos and souvenirs again, Mike gently but firmly said, "Mom, these are our rules. We respect you, but this is our home and our life." She frowned, as if not understanding why everything had changed. I felt relief. For the first time in a long while, I was in control of my life again. But the inner turmoil didn't come only from Patricia. I myself struggled with guilt and fear that I might damage my relationship with Mike. I thought a lot about how to preserve my attachment to him while protecting myself. My choice was difficult. We decided to temporarily minimize contact with Patricia, give her time to realize that intruding into our private affairs was unacceptable, but still maintain respect and attachment to her as Mike's mother. One day, Patricia tried to organize a meeting with our mutual acquaintances to tell how I should live. I felt rage boiling inside, but I chose a different path. I calmly explained the situation to the acquaintances, showed specific examples of her behavior, and to my relief, they sided with me. That gave me resolve. With each such collision, I learned to protect my boundaries. I learned that self-respect and respect for memories of my mother were more important than fear of confrontations. I no longer feared saying no, and surprisingly, Mike began to see me in a new light, as a strong and determined woman capable of standing up for her rights. The climax came a couple of months later. Patricia showed up with a new plan. She wanted to rethink all our family traditions, suggesting improvements to fit her idea of the perfect home. I sat down with Mike at the table, and we delivered the verdict. "Patricia," I said evenly but firmly, "we respect you and your affection, but we can no longer tolerate intrusions into our home and private matters. If you want to stay in our lives, you'll have to honor our rules." She froze. In her gaze flashed a mix of annoyance and surprise, but now we were united. Mike held my hand, and I felt that finally we were together, owning our relationship, not letting outsiders undermine it. After that, Patricia visited less often. Her appearances became formal, without efforts to dictate or impose views. I felt relief and inner freedom. I started building my life by my own rules again, preserving memories of my mother and developing new bonds with Mike. In this period, I learned a key lesson. Affection and attachment are not dictatorship. True intimacy is achievable only when each individual preserves their personal boundaries and respects the boundaries of others. The story ended with me finally finding peace of mind. Mike and I strengthened our bond, Patricia eventually accepted the new conditions, and I felt like myself again. A woman, daughter of my mother, and partner, not an object of someone else's dominance.